Welcome to the Longevity Lounge, a podcast, a club, and an event series that seeks to uncover some of the secrets to living well and feeling younger longer. Every episode we interview a longevity legend or a health expert, from neuroscientists through to exercise physiologists, as we investigate and try to make sense of the emerging science behind longevity. I'm Karl Treacher. I'm an adjunct associate professor of social science, and I'm joined by my co-host and co-founder of the Longevity Lounge, former world Ironman champion, Guy Leech. Leechy, today we have an incredible household name joining us, a former world number 15 tennis professional and an Australian kid from Canberra who stood toe-to-toe with the likes of McEnroe and Edberg, winning 3 ATP singles titles, 16 doubles titles, and was quarter-finalist in the Australian Open and a semi-finalist in the US Open. Of course, I'm talking about Wally Masur.
Oh, Walsh is such a legend. You know, I remember back in the 80s when I used to watch all sports, and tennis being one of those, and the wide water sports, and the Australian Open. Australian Open seemed like such a big event, didn't it, when we were kids? And Wally was there. He just seemed like a great guy and just encapsulated what a true Aussie's like.
Yeah. Watching him, obviously I was a lot younger than you were at that time, but watching him play tennis, I used to admire him for his being a national ambassador as much as being a tennis professional. He seemed to have such a lovely nature to him. When McEnroe was smashing tables and rackets, he was just calm.
I come across Wall on the northern beaches of Sydney here and there, and it's always sort of, I always think, geez, Wall's looking good. Like he's around my age. He looks fit. He looks healthy. And he's just the perfect person to have on the Longevity Lounge to really, I'm keen to know what he does from a regimentation point of view of just every week what he does to keep himself in such great nick.
I think with some of these longevity legends like Wally, it's really interesting to unpick their motivation and drive. What has made them great? You know, that question will come to you too at some point. But what is the drive to help them get up and be, a world beater? I think his family investigating that to some extent be very interesting.
Let's get into it.
Wally Masur, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here for episode 1.
Just excited to have you. I thought you'd be the perfect guest.
Well, Leech, I saw you striking balls at the Narrabeen, the driving range there, and we had a little chat, and I thought I better come and hear what he's got to say.
Wally, for those few listeners that don't know your name and your background, can you give us a little bit of an insight into, who you are and why people may or may not know you?
If you follow tennis, probably heard my name. People say, I've seen you before, I know the name. But basically played pro tennis for about 15 odd years. Played a lot of Davis Cup, which was huge for me. Loved Davis Cup. Yeah, and of course we've always had the Australian Open, so January's always a bit of a focus for tennis. And even after pro tennis, I've stayed involved in the sport. Luckily, it's a pretty big international sport, so there are a lot of opportunities. And I do talk to some sportsmen who get a bit lost post-career, but tennis does afford you a lot of potential avenues to go down. So I've been lucky to stay in the game for a long time.
I do remember back in the 80s being at home and watching you in some of the big events. I remember seeing you once play against John McEnroe. So you were back in that era where there were those mega personalities, back when tennis had those big names that were doing things on the court that you don't see these days. And then you probably transitioned through those guys into maybe a more professional type tennis player.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, when I look at the game now and I reflect when I started, which was very early 80s, McEnroe was at the top. Jimmy Connors, Bjorn Borg was just walking away from the game. And I got to play all those characters. And then I played right through that whole, the Becker, the Stefan Edberg, the Jim Courier era into the Sampras Agassi era. And that sort of finished me when I started to meet those guys. But, I started off, it was literally, I grew up in Canberra, played a lot of sport as a kid, skied every weekend. My dad was Austrian. I started skiing when I was 5. And then I got onto the tour and I started to play all these characters that had been going to Miami and Florida academies and spending 6 hours on the court a day. So I sort of had this really slow burn. I actually had my best year on tour at 30 because I'd sort of almost gone from an amateur type setup to the pro game. It took me a while to adjust and find my best tennis, but it was a great time to play. You had an absolute ball, but professionalism was certainly coming in the late 80s and early 90s, and then I sort of stepped away in the mid 90s, and the game has kind of taken on a whole new level since then.
It's interesting, but both of you quite humble in terms of your character.
Oh, I don't know if I'm humble.
Not sure. Maybe just one of you here today.
Only outwardly, yeah.
And look, but the reality is, for you to have got to the levels that you've competed at, you would have had a very high performance mindset, and probably both you. Leech, you retired at 35. You just mentioned in the introduction, and Wally, I'm not too sure when you retired.
Just a bit younger than that. I was like, I dipped out of the top 100 for the first time in quite a while. It was like I was like 33, and then I ended up with a stress fracture on the knuckle of my kneecap, on the knuckle of the femur. And it was kind of a question, do I try to get back and have another crack? And I was like, no. And I kind of say, people say, oh, you retired. Well, the tour sort of retired me. The game had just evolved. I grew up playing with wooden rackets with natural gut. The technology had evolved. And I was now playing players that had grown up with modern technology. So their swing and their technique matched the technology, and I was playing a very old style of game. So the tour sort of retired me at around 33.
When you first started, your training regime must have been different compared to by the time you're at your peak and ranked number 15th in the world, because I'm assuming when it was not as professional, then maybe training once a day was enough, and then all of a sudden these athletes came along and they were training a lot more than what you were.
I think it was interesting that you mentioned that, because when I started out, there was characters on tour like Borg and Guillermo Vilas, and they were absolute workhorses. They were, Guillermo Vilas used to come to Australia, and I had the chance to hit with him as a junior. He would line up like 4 juniors and hit with each junior for 2 hours in a row. He'd spend 6 to 8 hours on court, not leave the court, only for toilet breaks, have all his drinks and food brought out to him, and just work through each player, just wear them down. And it was kind of very static, just hitting a lot of balls, not overly dynamic. And the culture was very much a running culture. 5K, 10K, intervals, 400s. Interval running was huge, and obviously you had to do the distance running to build up the endurance to do the intervals. And I met, midway through my career, I met an AFL trainer, and he introduced me to a weight program. That sort of started the shift away from this running culture, which it's a running game, tennis, and the weights became a bit like golf.
More strength.
Yeah. I'd reached a point in my career, I was in a bit of a lull. I was hovering around 35, 40. And I just was looking for a bit of a breakthrough, and there was a few things going on in my life personally that weren't great. Yeah, and I was just caught. He was a kind of one of those guys, Leechy, that takes you along for the ride. He does everything with you. He's very motivational. And he was a big help to me. But he introduced me to a full-on weights regime, which I sort of loved and have stuck with, really for the rest of my time. And I've had so many good people, as you do, who mentor you and coach you, and whether directly or indirectly. But I've always kind of liked that style, not so much chat, more let's get in and do this together, leading by example. Tony Roach is someone I've always looked up to as a coach, mentor, because he just gets out there and does the work. And when he speaks, you listen, a bit like a Wayne Bennett type character. There was a wonderful old Australian by the name of Bob Carmichael, who was an ex-player, who was tremendous influence on 20 years of Australian talent. And when Bob spoke, you listened, and he was tremendous. So I've always kind of enjoyed that style of person, people that kind of take you along for the ride. I'm not big on, a lot of chat and a lot of presentations, just get down and do the work.
Is that an old school thing, do you think?
A little bit, yeah.
Like our generation, more bleeding, work hard, just,
Yeah,
don't need to talk about it, just get it done?
Just get it done. And I've always found too, Guy, that, I know sports psychologists can play a really important role, but I always found with those type of people that I'm talking about, the Bob Carmichaels of the world and Tony Roach, I don't think they even know they're doing it. They're sort of like sports psychologists anyway. They encourage.
Without training to be one.
Without training. They sort of encourage, they guide, they give you a little chip when you need it. They're just really good characters. So I've probably tended, when I've worked with athletes to try to incorporate a bit of that myself, because I've got 4 kids and you try to solve the problem through your eyes. But if you take a step back and you start to understand the individual a little bit better and get their mindset, what makes them tick, then you can make a bit more of a difference. And sometimes it's not the hours on court where you can have an impact. It could be, a taxi ride to the airport or, a quiet dinner that when you're on the road that you can make an impact. So I've always, appreciated those sort of characters.
Leechy, it's probably a question for you too, because you've come from that individualistic mindset of wanting to be the best in the world, and you've achieved that. At what point do you switch across to looking at being a coach or an inspiration for others, which you've also been?
Yeah, I think when you're competing, your focus is on what you're doing. I think that transition comes through when you retire and you sort of feel like you want to give back. I mean, opportunities probably came up for you, Wal, as well. I know you captained and coached the Davis Cup. So, yeah, I sort of was always there, helpful to other athletes, even from a point of view of just the sponsorship side and how to turn it into a business in some ways and what you did around that. I mean, I was fortunate to be able to go and run the Ironman series, the professional series. I owned that with another business, another company for 4 years, got it back on television live. So, yeah, I mean, it just feels good to give back, doesn't it? And I mean, Wal would have an incredible amount of knowledge from your time doing what you did, and same with me, and you're happy to help out, huh?
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, it's a passion, isn't it? You know, playing tennis for me was a passion. I loved it. I don't think, and I don't know how it went with you, Guy, but it wasn't something that you necessarily said as a junior, I want to be a pro and make money. You just sort of loved playing tennis, and that's where it took you. And it's sort of been a bit like that post-career as well. And that was something I always wanted to be involved in, was the Davis Cup, because I had an unbelievable time playing Davis Cup, great teammates, big moments, because it was the home and away format, which was big back then, home ties, home finals as a player and as a coach. So that was something that was something that I really wanted to do post-tennis, and I got that chance.
It seems like the big names in tennis, the Nukes that were around, you mentioned Tony Roach, they were also big into the Davis Cup. It was like the badge of honour. It's like, if you're going to bleed, you're going to bleed, to do with representing your country. And it was like, for guys that were so famous and made so much money out of tennis, I loved the fact that the Aussies would take Davis Cup and put it up on a pedestal above pretty much anything else.
Yeah.
It was sort of Wimbledon status, and you wanted to go and represent your country. I just loved that.
I think for the Aussies, and obviously the Olympics has grown in stature, because I don't think, the Olympics didn't need tennis. Did tennis need the Olympics? So you could argue the case, but it's certainly come a long way, and players do get the chance now to represent their country in the Olympics. But sort of 80s, that was your only opportunity to play Davis Cup, and we had such a rich history in Davis Cup that I think any young Australian aspired to be a part of that. And I had a wonderful captain in Neil Fraser, who was captained himself by Harry Hopman, so we had this incredible legacy and this passing down of knowledge and the whole ethos of why we were there and what we were trying to achieve. And it's an individual sport. You rock up to a Grand Slam, there's 128 players, 127 of them want to beat you. Yeah. That's just how it is. Yeah. But when you're playing Davis Cup, there's this common cause. And, I played Davis Cup with Cashy, who was an absolute giant in that format. And then, John Fitzgerald, Darren Cahill, the Woodies, so many, they're my mates today. Yeah. And we just forged a great friendship, and we had a great time playing Davis Cup. So, yeah, as I said, for me to then be involved at the other end as I got 1 year to be captain, and I was coach for about 6 years with John Fitzgerald as captain, who's one of my best mates. That whole thing's been an absolute blast. And I lament the fact that we've lost that home and away format. They crunch it together now in 1 week, in a couple of weeks in Europe at the back end of the year, and it's just not quite the same.
Yeah, right.
Well, you talk about Cashy. You may not know, but I was in Kooyong with Cashy and Ivanisevic in the late 80s as a linesman.
I was going to say you're a tennis guy.
That'd be a volatile mix. Ivanisevic and Cashy.
That particular match. So I'd come straight out of school. Colin Stubbs at the time, I think.
Yeah, Stubbsy, yeah.
Yeah, so I went to school with his son. So, of course, his son and his mates became the linesmen for that tournament. Yep. I was on might have been the semis, day 10 or whatever it might be in that tournament, and I was on the service line, and my best mate was on the other service line. And we decided to have this game where who could call the loudest for faults. Now, I had Ivanisevic and Cashy on the court at that particular time. And obviously that got up their nose a little bit. At the end, you can see how you're enjoying this, yeah. And then to the second set, and we decided, listen, it's going to be who can call the longest. So our fault calls went for
brave linesman.
5 or 6. Well, Cashy looked at me like, I'm going to end you right now. Yeah. And then we were removed from centre court, never to be seen again. But I did want to sort of change and shift our conversation.
Do you want to apologise for that now?
I'd like to make an official apology to Tennis Australia.
All of our audience
to your mate Cashy as well for that particular tournament. No doubt he remembers that fondly. I want to move the conversation a little bit into longevity. So correct me if I'm wrong, but today's your birthday.
Yeah, that's 61.
Really?
61.
We've got you on your
Oh, you
birthday.
didn't
That's
even
it.
tell me.
Yeah.
It's a surprise.
Wow.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Wall.
Thank you. My birthday's always overshadowed. My wife's on the 11th, so she's a couple of days ago. And then, of course, it was Mother's Day. So somehow my birthday always gets a little overshadowed, but I've learned to live with it.
That's very much the case. But I'm keen to know the practices and the discipline that you had mentally as a youngster growing into professional ranks, moving now into the later or second half of your life. What do you believe in? What things do you subscribe to stay younger longer?
It was mentioned to me that the name of this lounge is the Longevity Lounge. I started to think about it. I said to Leechy, what's the gist of it as I walked into the room here? But it's sort of interesting, Guy, and you obviously involved in something that required big hours, hours and hours of training, and you just got to get up and do it all again the next day.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I look back upon what I did, I thought, how could you do that? But it just seemed very easy at the time. I guess I was an active kid. I had active parents. My mum's still alive at 97. My father lived into his 90s, and they both were. Dad was playing golf into his late 80s. Mum was playing tennis into her late 80s, and Mum still gardens at 97. Just lost a license, which she's a little cranky about, but hey, probably the right thing. It's hard to explain. I mean, I was very good at just getting up and doing it all again the next day. It didn't seem to faze me. I always looked forward to it, and whether that was as a kid playing soccer or going skiing or playing tennis and training for tennis, it never seemed like a chore. It always seemed like something that I was keen to do. So some people are creative, great musicians, artists, writers, whatever everyone's got skills. There's a whole world of IT out there now with brilliant people doing amazing things. I think I was probably a product of my time where we didn't have social media. There were no computers. There was no smartphones. You got home from school, you threw your bag in your room, you ran out on the street to see what was going on. And I had to be home when the streetlights came on for dinner. So it was just an active life.
And now, so how do you transition?
Well, I'm a bit the same.
Yeah, right.
I'm probably a bit like you. I
just keep
got
doing
a bit
stuff.
I got a road bike. I got a stationary bike. I lived in Collaroy for a number of years. I met a bunch of blokes at the surf club there. They introduced me to the surf ski because I grew up in Canberra. I wasn't much good in the water, but I'm into that. So but I don't have a strict routine, but I just feel like every day I get up and do something. I've got a few weights in the garage that I throw around.
So your rules, so like I've got a whole bunch of rules around what I do. And one of the things, when I turned 60 in Feb, because I'm goal driven, I said, what do I want to be doing when I'm 70 in 10 years' time? And sort of set a program in some ways on exercise, food, recovery, to give myself the best chance when I'm 70 to do the things that I want to still do. Have you gone to that level, or has it been more you're just sort of just cruising through with the energy that you've got now?
I've probably arrived at a similar point, but from the other angle. My wife's actually a nurse. Was a nurse, not a nurse now, but she was a nurse, so she's got a lot of medical background and diet and food and all the rest of it. But it was probably, as I say, an environmental thing where my parents were very active, and as a consequence, I was. That's my predisposition. I don't have a routine, Leechy, but when I do things, I do the same thing. I'm a bit of like if I ride a bike, I will ride the same route for months and months and months on end before I change it, and I'll do exactly the same thing, and I'll stop at exactly the same place and have a coffee. When I go to the gym for 3 or 4 months, I'll do exactly the same thing, almost absolutely to the letter, and then I'll change it. So I sort of have, without defining it, it just sort of occurs.
Well, you do something every day.
Yeah.
Most days you'll be active in doing something.
Yeah, and I'm still involved with Tennis Australia. So I have slowed down a lot since COVID. COVID sort of gave me an opportunity to have a look at things from a different perspective. And my parents were getting a little elderly, and my dad passed away during that time. So I'd needed to spend a bit of energy in other areas. But yeah, probably. But mate, I got 2 big dogs. I walk them twice a day. Even that, there's just I took them this morning to Nolan Reserve, and we sloshed around in the wet.
Yeah, I did round the block with my dogs.
Yeah. But so I probably arrive at a similar situation to you, but maybe from the other angle. I've never sort of written things down or thought about it.
Yeah.
Just sort of take a step and see where it takes you.
I'm interested in food. I think that food's a big part of what we need to do right. I'm a big believer in what you eat, when you eat, and how much. Have you got any guidelines on that for yourself?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, because in the context of the Longevity Lounge, and it's interesting observing my mother. My mother's 4'11".
Really?
4'11", but she's a little dynamo, and she doesn't eat a lot. Mum and Dad never. My father grew up in wartime Europe. He was born 31, So as a teenager, he was in Austria and the war was raging, and he got sent to a farm because there was no food in town, and he worked on a farm and left school at 12. So he had a very interesting life, a very different life to what people, what we enjoy today. And the two of them never ate processed food. And that there wasn't, soft drinks, that just wasn't in our house. It didn't happen. And we just sort of ate well. So once again, it's almost that environmental thing. I was sort of exposed to good habits early. So without really studying or defining it, I've sort of, it's been okay just based on my upbringing. When I exercise or do things, I get a bit stuck. I eat the same thing all the time. I'm boring.
But
so maybe
works,
that helps. Maybe
right?
that helps.
Because you're 62 today and
61.
61.
How
Sorry.
old are you?
60. I'm a year behind.
So your birthday soon, right? You're coming
in
soon?
February next year. So we're
close.
We're half a year or so in difference. But you're fit. You look fit. You look healthy. So what you're doing is working.
But it's funny you say that. Mum and Dad never went to doctors. I've had a knee replacement. Dad had a knee replacement. Mum's had a hip replacement. So you get worn out over time. Your joints wear out. But it was interesting because a good friend of mine, Todd Woodbridge, and I'm going to say heart attack. I don't know if it was a heart attack, but he definitely had an episode. Ambulance came.
Wow.
That's right. I remember.
Yeah. And
it was a big shock to
It
everyone.
was a big shock because Todd was not out of shape and he was in pretty, he looks after himself and he's a smart guy. And he just we were just chatting. He said, you should go and have your cholesterol checked because I never do any of that stuff. And I did. And obviously, and it was weird because I've got all these blockages in my arteries, which is a genetic. The guy said, look, you're predispositioned to it. So now I'm on statins.
Yeah. And no stents put in?
No stents put in.
Okay.
He said, look, if you look after yourself. And he said, the big thing is, do you smoke? No, I don't. Do you drink? Yes, occasionally. Yeah. He said, smoking and drinking is not great. What's your diet, blah, blah, blah. But if you're sensible and you exercise and you take the statins, you'll be fine. So hopefully that's the case. But it is interesting, isn't it? You talk about longevity, you can get blindsided. There's a whole genetic, and I know you're going to be talking to people that are experts in the field, but obviously there's a genetic predisposition to any number of things, irrespective of lifestyle, isn't there, that can cut you down.
You remember Dean Mercer?
Yeah, I was about to say.
You remember Dean Mercer? He used to race against myself.
Very much
Trevor
so, yeah.
and Indy and the boys, and he was 47, hadn't been checked up, and had a massive heart attack driving his car after a morning training session, still training twice.
And he would have been a beast, right?
Fit as you could get. Yeah, just...
and did he come through that all right?
No, didn't make it.
So
my God. The funeral was one of the worst things I've been to in my life.
Yeah.
It was like 1,000 people turned up on the Gold Coast in shock.
Yeah.
It was horrific. And I suppose the takeout is that you can look really, really fit and healthy on the outside, but if you don't know what's going on the inside, then we've got problems.
Well, maybe that's a lesson there, isn't it? As reluctant as a lot of men are to just check, and maybe, as you hit that 45, 50, 55, maybe those checks are important because, you can get blindsided. And it's funny you say that, or not funny you say that, but, just mentioning that, I lost, my best mate was a guy called Brad Druitt, and he died of motor neuron disease.
That's right.
Peter Doohan, who I played Davis Cup with, he died of motor neuron disease. And then Peter McNamara, who I played Davis Cup with, and he was a big, fit, he was a great player, Peter, and, tremendous player and big, fit, strong guy, had a great career coaching, really worked with some tremendous players, and he ended up getting cancer and passing away. So early detection, getting yourself checked, as reluctant as I said a lot of men are to do that, probably does make some sense. The
idea of the lounge was to cut through a lot of the noise out there. There's so much noise. If you go searching on the web and social media, they're telling you to take this product and that supplement, aren't they, Karl? And there's a bunch of us that just would send things to each other and, do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? And then someone would poo-poo a certain supplement and you become confused, right?
Yeah.
On what to do. And, the idea of what we've got here is to give good information to people that want to learn and be around for a lot longer in a healthy way.
Yeah. And
which is so important.
It's interesting too, isn't it? Once again, it's anecdotal. I have no, background whatsoever and can't speak with any authority on health and fitness from a scientific perspective. It's all anecdotal. I'm a believer in Western medicine, Your knees, you got bone and bone in your knee, what do? You're going to get a knee replacement. I've kind of steered away from supplements and those sort of things. I've always felt like, well, if I eat healthily and live a healthy life, hopefully that's enough. And I'm sure that there's a lot of positive things you can do. But you are right, I'm not on social media, but, my kids are, and I'm aware of there's a whole world out there of influencers suggesting this, that and the other. Yeah, you got to be a little bit careful with what you read and what you hear and what you ingest, put it that way.
There's a lot to be said about actually not being on social media like you aren't, and just saving your time into going into other things. So.
It does seem time consuming.
With this conversation, obviously talking to you both as elite athletes, there's the other side of that, and I was subject to this too, which is overdoing it, and whether Dean Mercer sort of falls in that category or not. But with any luck, we get given a little bit of an insight or a trigger that something's not right. So I'm 52, I'm 73 kilos. I got a liver scan that said I've got fatty liver disease. Now, normally fatty liver disease comes with obesity and poor lifestyle choices. I'm a vegan. I don't drink. I don't smoke.
Very healthy.
I'm very disciplined, have been my whole life, largely due to those people that sort of set a stage for me to follow. But the reality is the remedy for that is lifestyle-based. So the doctor said there's nothing we can do about that, but you need to limit your carbohydrates to 100 grams a day. Right. So that means I don't do breakfast anymore, and I might eat a piece of toast or some sort of oats or something during the day, or pasta in mid-afternoon, but that's it. And the tests after 6 months came back and said, you're fine. Your liver numbers are right. My dad died from it. He was the same sort of shape as me.
So it's a genetic problem, yeah.
But hopefully you get that insight early to go and explore and then work out, is it a medical remedy or is it a lifestyle thing, or is it both?
And I think just at the start of that anecdote, you kind of mentioned overdoing it, and and I know in your game, Leechy, I'm sure I know in cycling and rowing, there's been some athletes that end up. Was it Greg Welsh? I can't remember which one it was. They
Welsh had heart problems.
Just end up with a massive heart problem because they almost just overload. It's an overload on the body, and I think that's probably something, when you look at rugby league now and just the demands of that sport, the demands of being an endurance athlete, even the demands of tennis these days and how violent the sport is and how quickly they move. And, I look at Rafa, he's going to be an orthopaedic surgeon's dream in about 10 years because he's just beaten himself up. So there's no question that people are really, in elite sport, are just pushing the boundaries to what their body is capable of. And the average punter in the street, because I kind of, it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at, like CrossFit and F45, I walk past and I go, wow, it's pretty extreme. It's pretty full on. Yep. And as you know, every injury never completely goes away. You always pay a little price for it later on. They're there.
And they add up.
You've got scar tissues, they add up, joints get arthritis. So you sometimes, I feel like saying, I even say it to my kids, because they're both in the gym and they both like to stay reasonably fit. Moderation, can really be the key, drink moderately, eat moderately, exercise moderately. Don't overdo it, because you can pay a little bit of a price too if you get a bit over keen, and you kind of got to build up to things too.
Well, you mentioned, so I spent 5 years doing a sports science degree 150 years ago, but
you're a professor, aren't you?
I am an associate professor of social science, got nothing to do with health and fitness. But
that's why I said that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And he's got the glasses. He looks very professorial.
He looks very
Wally mentioned his dad finished school at 12, and I understand you did too, Leechy. But getting on with the point,
Leechy was just wagging.
14.
Wally, you mentioned cycling and rowing, for instance. Now, my cardiologist, because I've got atrial fibrillation, much like Welshie and McCartney, etc., that sort of, and Bruce Thomas, those saddle sports, apparently that's one of the triggers, is the rowing and the cycling, that exertion of cardiovascular along with resistance training collectively.
Right.
A lot of pressure on your heart can lead to those arrhythmias. And you saw people like Sonny Colbrelli, who won the Paris-Roubaix a few years ago, have a heart attack at the end of a race. Professional cyclist, best in the world at the time, but it can go unrecognised. So I think as we get older and you start looking at the cyclists in their 40s, which is very popular in Australia, and I'm one of them, the incidence of arrhythmia and cardiovascular challenge, it's happening to more people than it's actually registered. So I think one of the things we want to do at the Longevity Lounge here is encourage people to go and see a cardiologist. I know we lost a close friend, your best mate at the time, to a heart attack.
Yeah.
Again, fit, trained all the time, but just underlying condition.
Yeah. Was it Grant Kenny too, or Lisa Curry?
Lisa Curry.
They had.
Kenny,
did she not?
She had an implant put in, like a defib.
Yeah, that's right.
And she had heart problems. There's a lot of athletes that have pushed their body,
particularly endurance athletes.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, I touch wood. For me, I've been checked up. I get checked up every 3 to 5 years with my heart.
Yeah.
And it's fine, but you run the risk, don't you? Because you put yourself under so much pressure when you're younger, and you would have seen it. A lot of the time, the more work you did, the better you got. So it became this cycle of just let's cram more work in.
Yeah.
Let's do more work. Let's train harder.
And
And you 99% of the time you'd beat someone else that wasn't working as hard as you, which is
the kind of the key to it all, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of tennis players around now in Australian tennis that some work hard and others don't work as hard as they should, and and we're seeing that at the moment. So
Yeah. Well, I think
there's obviously a fine line, isn't there?
I think Alex Diminar is a great case in point because, Alex, not a big kid, he's probably one of those guys that works hard to put weight on and, there's a lot of big men playing the game and, Alex, when he sort of burst onto the scene, he's probably just nudging 70, 69 kilos, not very heavy for a tennis player.
It's like a triathlete.
Yeah, and he's just worked so hard. And look at him now; he's a top 10 player.
And that's workload, isn't it?
It's work. He's fantastic. Great attitude and it's great skill set.
Yeah.
But geez, he's worked hard at his craft.
Earned skill set and earned his position. Whereas a Kyrgios that's so talented, if he had the workload of the person what's the name?
The demon, Alex Diminar.
Yeah, Diminar. Then he could be number one in the world.
Oh,
So
Nick's an incredible combination of skill, and he's a big man who can move. He's athletic and fast and dynamic, and got power, but he's also got this incredible soft hands. Like he's an amazing amalgam of
You don't
skills.
get everything, do you? Like how many athletes do you know that if there's 10 things that you've got to do to be the best in the world and be one of those decade athletes in a sport, tick every box.
Yeah.
You get the ones that are just overly talented, but they just don't tick all the other boxes.
Well, we
It's
sort of
just
got that in tennis, weirdly. In the men's game, we got 4 of them together.
They ticked all the boxes
They just
at
were
one time.
phenomenal in their
Unusual.
their effort, their industry, their skill set, which is all a little different, subtly different. When I was
But
growing
no
up,
weakness.
when I was growing up, I looked at, obviously Borg did his thing, won a stack of 11 majors or whatever it was, and then Sampras wins 13. I'm going, that'll never be repeated. And then we got 3 of them winning 20 plus at the same time, and they were so dominant. And they just, I used to go and watch Raf. I used to do some commentary for Fox at the French. I'd go and watch him practice on his days off because I was like, man, who's going to beat this guy on this surface? He's phenomenal. Like the work rate, the intensity, everything he did was just so phenomenal. And I admired him so much. And, obviously Federer was like the artist, but I want to hear from Roger. Roger's been kind of quiet since he retired. Whatever he did training-wise off the court, he played something like 850 matches consecutively without a withdrawal, without an injury.
So that's the blueprint, isn't
He probably was injured at times, or, minorly, but geez, he managed his career well, and he worked hard, and he was pushed around in a lot of those matches. He had to cover some territory, and he had a beautiful game style. It was fluid and
He looked like he would
effortless.
get injured less because he was just so soft on his feet.
He was like a dancer, wasn't he?
Beautiful,
But
like a ballet dancer.
whatever he did, I reckon it's a pretty good blueprint to look at.
And would he
follow.
do that? Is he the type of individual that will go and help others in years to come?
Rogers, yes, I would. I'm not sure he'd go to you. You might have to go to him. But he's a very open, honest character, very engaging, clever guy. A lot of them, we always stick a microphone in their face and ask them a question in English. We just take it for granted they speak English, and then Roger will go and do German. He'll do his French interviews, and they're clever people. Novak the same, very clever. And Novak's probably a good case study as well for how he's managed his career as a pro athlete. But I was always amazed at Roger how he just backed up and was ready to go and never injured. Rafa, you can kind of understand because, he holds the racket like an axe and it's brutal. And when
he runs, he's heavy.
Yeah,
running.
you can see the pain. And when he quits, he's a pretty big man, Rafa.
Yeah.
Roger's much slighter build. But I always admired just his durability, Roger Federer's durability.
Well, in moving into the future, I know this conversation started because you saw each other on the golf range one day.
We might lose. If we start talking golf here, we could lose people.
Yeah,
Well, I'm not gonna let that happen.
Leach was smacking drives 300 metres, I tell you.
I
It's
don't
a
know.
new ping driver.
Sure, that's true. But have you got goals moving forward with your golf? Is that where your focus is now?
It was funny because we were just chatting on the golf range and I was very cheesily sitting in on my son's lesson.
You were.
He was getting, because he's kind of keen, and I said, mate, don't listen to me. It's a blind leading the blind. Get a lesson, and we lucked out. We got a lesson off Ian Pazel down there at Narrabeen. He's a great old character, and I shouldn't say old. He's a great character.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was hitting some balls, and I sat in on the last 10 minutes, but I think the idea, because, I'm not going to become a better runner or rider at my age. The best is past, and now I'm hanging on and trying to maintain. But golf is something that you can continually try to improve at. So I think it's nice to have something that you feel like you can get better at.
Do you need that? I need it.
I feel like I do.
Oh,
and golf is that vehicle, constantly thinking, well, if I hit a few more balls or do this or do that, and that's something I can get better at. So maybe that's just that little niche for me at the moment.
I think that we're going to have a neuroscientist coming on who's a professor at QUT, and she talks about all sorts of things, but one is the neuroplasty and the ability for our brain to grow and be growing that 3% at any given time when we're trying something new. I think golf affords us that opportunity, that you're always trying to perfect something or fix something, that you're never sort of complacent where if you go swimming, Leech, you've swum for 75 years or whatever it might be, it's just so natural for you.
It's interesting for me. I actually enjoy the practice of golf more than, in some ways, the playing. And we talk about meditation and clearing the mind and feeling good in the head. And golf does that for me. If I stand on a range hitting balls by myself and working on my swing, everything else gets cleared out of my head. And I usually finish feeling fantastic. And for me, that's sort of meditation.
And don't you think too, and I'm sure the other things that you do have that effect, and that's probably one of the great effects of exercise, isn't it? That you've got a busy day, or you've got a routine, or the things are going to occur, but if you can get up and have your moment for yourself and just do it for yourself, whatever that might be, whether you hop on a bike or jump on the surf ski or just whatever it is, and you feel like, well, I've done that for myself, now the rest of the day I can, do what I need to do.
This is Wal saying this is your first podcast you've done, but just strangely.
Well, I do a bit of work for media for TA, but it's usually sort of interviews, or I'm interviewing people, or and it's very tennis related. So, but I suppose we're talking about just general health and wellness. Yeah.
What where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? We've taken up a lot of your time this morning, but where do you see yourself in 10? Where's Wally? What's Wally Masur doing?
Where's
what
Wally?
goals?
That's the question.
Where is Wally?
That's the question. As I say, I'm a bit ritualised. I'd like to think I'm kind of doing what I'm doing now, to be honest, and that's playing the occasional game of golf, enjoying everything that my children and grandchildren, I've got 2 grandchildren, that they've got to offer, but that I'm still active. My dad went into a nursing home due to a series of strokes at 89, 90, and he was very cognizant. He was really mentally alert, but he'd lost mobility, and as a consequence, with only mum at home, he needed help with his mobility. So he went into a nursing home, and he said, and he was that kind of guy that just liked doing things. Loved his golf, loved hitting golf balls on the oval, and played twice a week. And he said, my best days are over. I've got nothing to look forward to. That growing the brain 3%. And he kind of gave up when he got into the home. He did. They did physio there every morning, and he did it religiously, thinking that by doing that every morning, he could improve. And I really admired him for doing it because it wasn't easy. But he had a red hot go at the rehab, 5 weeks of rehab. He had a red hot go at about 5 weeks of physio, but there was no improvement to be had. The strokes had taken his mobility away, and he just looked at him and he said, "That's it," And I think I might be a bit like him. I think I'd be a bit frustrated if I can't do the things that I want to do. So staying active and staying motivated is important to me. So I'd like to think at 71 I can be doing what I'm doing at 61 to a degree.
Yeah, terrific.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for joining us today on Longevity Lounge on your birthday. Incredible.
On your birthday. I didn't even know. Sorry for
birthday. At 61 they come and go. But it's interesting, isn't it? Longevity, 61 is a lot of years, and as I said, my mum's 97, but you can't take anything for granted, can you?
Long way to go.
Just before you go, one last thing. What did you do for your 60th? Anything special?
I was in Europe with the missus. We had COVID savings. We had pent-up COVID savings. We hadn't done anything for a few years, and I often travel with my work with tennis, whether it be through commentary or, certainly through the Davis Cup. So we had not done anything for a period of time. And we had about, my son actually got married in Sweden. He's got a Swedish girlfriend, got married in Sweden. So we kind of stitched that into the whole thing. And I think I was in Italy. So my wife and I think it was a few beers and a pizza and turned 60.
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome chat. We need to play golf.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to get up to Terry Hills or Long Reef.
If the rain will stop, yeah.
The next couple of weeks, let's do it because we haven't played golf for a long time.
Well, I'll talk to you because remember at Monash there. So
Before we lose all our listeners to your golf conversation, let's wind this up. Thanks so much for joining us.
good on you. Thank you.
On your wall.
Good on you guys.
Leechy, at the end of every episode, we've got a range of resources on our website that people can go to. And I wanted to summarise some of those. With Wally today, some really interesting things. I know you've trained a lot of big names in the past, people like Madonna, George Clooney, Cyndi Lauper, Michael Jackson before he died.
Well, not all true there, but a couple of them, yes.
Well, one of the things that Wally talked about was getting a regular checkup.
Yeah, that was I was surprised. Were you surprised?
I was surprised. Yeah, but he's such a workhorse. He's obviously just focused on the work and just very single-minded.
But that's an Aussie thing, right? So it doesn't matter whether you've been a tennis star. It just seems like if you're an Australian male, you just don't get checked up as much.
At that age, for sure.
Yeah, like narrowing of the arteries for someone that exercises every day just goes to show if you don't know what's going on inside your body, then you've got problems. I remember back to when Chucky, who had the heart incident in my paddling group and didn't make it, the washout from that was I said to about 100 mostly male guys that were fit, 39 to 72 years of age, I said, guys, you've got 12 weeks to go to the doctor and get a referral to go and get your heart checked, unless you've done that in the last 2 years. And so off they went, 100 fit-looking dudes that look after themselves. And shock horror, 5 had to have stents put in. The youngest guy in the group, the guy that was the fittest out of all of us, had 2 stents put in, and another 13 had to go on medication to control their arteries and just the narrowing of the arteries. So that was a massive wake up in that respect, and it's a good message that Wally's. You know, he's married to a nurse.
Yeah.
Come on.
I know. Leechy, the thing is, I suppose, and we're going to find this in every episode that we get into, the societal norms that we live in aren't really conducive to great health, which just means if we're not vigilant, if we're lazy about what we do, we just go along and do the things that everyone does, it generally leads to poorer health. I think that's something that we should call out. In things like intermittent fasting, you know, the Australian way is to wake up, have a big breakfast, you might have a smoothie, you might have eggs, might have bacon, keep going. If you do that every day, there's no chance that you're going to have optimal mortality.
Well, back in the 80s, 90s, and you could argue in the early 2000s, what did the health experts tell us about breakfast?
Well, you were one of them. I remember you being on TV on channel, I don't know, 2 or whatever.
Only because I Googled it and that's what it said. But it was meant to be the most important meal of the day.
That's right.
And so we were getting out of bed in the morning and telling our kids, you got to eat all your food, your breakfast, and you don't want to eat because you've done nothing. And you get out of bed and you force food down your throat. So it doesn't make sense. So intermittent fasting is one of those areas that we need to delve into on the lounge moving forward because there's so much strong scientific evidence to show that it's really good for you.
Absolutely. Leechy, just getting to the key points and the resources that we're supplying after Wally, the key statistics are interesting. Recommendations globally that these checkups are important because they will detect and treat chronic illness. I know you've done some work with people who want to be more healthy. Any particular stories?
Yeah, Jonathan Coleman comes to mind. So probably close to 20 years ago, I started training him. Jono, the media guy, first seen on Simon's Townsend, wonderful, whatever it's called.
Simon Townsend's Wonderworld. Yep.
That's the one. Thank you for that, Professor.
Yep. I was 3 at the time.
Yeah, no, you were about 13. And so we've grown up with Jono, and he was always on the heavier side, and I got him at 143 kilos.
Wow.
Not very tall. Sent him off to the doctor to get a checkup before we started training together to lose weight and get him healthy, get into some good habits into his life. And he had onset type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, you name it. We started exercising and moving him around, eating better. But the kicker with him was that we got him in early enough and did that checkup to find out where the baseline was. And 18 months later, he dropped 40 kilograms and there was no onset type 2 diabetes. Now that was gone. Blood pressure was normal and he was healthy. And he was like that for another 15 years before he passed away. So, the message, the takeout is that if you're not getting your bloods done every year, you're crazy. And if you're over the age of 40 and you haven't had your heart checked, which is the biggest killer in Australia, then you've got rocks in your head as well.
We've got a list of statistics and facts here about exercise being part of your day. You heard Wally say he does something every day. I know you do something every day, so do I. It's just one of those things. There's a whole heap of statistics that people can go to. Some of the things that jump out to me from this, participants in one particular study performed 2 to 4 times above the recommended amount of moderate physical activity, had a 26 to 31% lower overall cause mortality and a 28 to 38% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. That is enormous.
It defies, like, if you look at all the things that you're going to do in your life to give yourself a better chance of being on this earth and in a healthy way, then you have to exercise. There's no doubt. And look, obviously, if you've never done it before, I say to you, just get out of bed and go for a walk. You don't have to go and start doing burpees and star jumps to start your routine off in exercise. So there's got to be that sort of starting point, and just moving and walking is a good way to do that. You'll find very quickly that walk gets longer, that your body adapts to it, and you can do more than just walking, and you can get into exercise.
You do more. You do jazzercise now, I understand it.
Yeah, with Lycra on. Yeah, like you used to do with your bike riding.
It was Richard Simmons back in the day when you and Richard Simmons used to do that thing on TV. Hey, so look, one of the other things that's that we should point out is around Wall's attitude and framing. So one of the other things, Leechy, is Wally's attitude and his positive outlook. A study in 2019 based on 69,000 women and 1,400 men, which seems a little bit biased, found that being in a group with the most positive outlook was related to 11 to 15% longer lifespan versus the least optimistic group.
Yeah, amazing. So for me personally, my medication, my mental health has all been based around exercise. So that's been my companion all my life from the age of 8 when I started swimming training. And I do tend to find that if I blend that in with nature, so if I do my exercise, bike riding out on Narrabeen lakes, paddling out in the ocean, getting outdoors, that I even feel better. So there's, I completely, understand what those stats mean. And for me, it's been that constant companion in my life right through and still is today. Yeah.
Leechy, one thing that's a bit concerning for me is that because you did Coolangatta Gold and you're an Ironman champion, you did all that sport in your underpants, seeing you train on a bicycle wearing underpants in the middle of winter, surely you're freezing.
Being muscular and generating heat through effort means that it's fine. I mean, I don't care about people tooting me in the cars and making fun of me. I can deal with that.
That's the end of episode 1, Leechy, at the Longevity Lounge. For people interested, you can go to our Facebook page, which is Longevity Lounge 2024. Like it, share it, and then come back for the next episode.
See you then.